potential. The question is, what do we do with the potential? Well, we know what Adam does with the potential. He trashes it immediately. First go at it, bang. Now, what happens to his size, to his stature? It remains the same. But he's stripped of his spiritual power. Okay? So he may appear to be huge and all-powerful, but he isn't anymore because he's stripped of the spiritual power. Same thing is going to happen to Cain, right? When Cain is exiled from God, the spiritual power is taken away from him. Now Cain doesn't die. Cain goes out walking, but he's a dead man walking. Yeah? He's not really vital and alive the way he was created to be, but there he is. He even has a wife, and they have children. As a matter of fact, the world continues to a great extent because of Cain. This is an amazing, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to think about. That we are so immense in potential. We are so huge in potential. The question is, what do we do? If we don't have the spiritual is taken away from us, we're just shells. We're walking shells. Yeah? It would be very impressive on the outside or not, whatever. But the core is stripped. The problem is, here's the thing, the body dies. We know that already from the beginning, right? Adam and Eve are going to die. So the body dies. The spirit, however, doesn't die. Because the spirit didn't come from the earth. The spirit comes directly from God when God goes into the first human. So that which animates us in that sense is eternal. The body falls away. But Kashya, there's a problem here. The only way that we can actually benefit from the spirit is if there is a body. And that's why it says in the book of Shmot, tell them to build me a sanctuary so I can dwell in them. Yeah? Don't look at it as build me a sanctuary somewhere on a hill somewhere for 50 million. No. I'm talking about make yourself a sanctuary so that the Spirit can dwell in you. Yeah? And when we look at what happens, what's the first act that God does after the discovery that Adam and Eve did what they did? Vayas lehem kutanot or. And God made them garments of, almost always in English it's translated as leather. Because the word or, ayin vav resh in Hebrew, means leather. But the word or actually means something more primal, which makes sense. It means skin. Because what is leather? It's the skin of an animal, right? So vayasem kutanot or, and God made them garments of skin. So what were they before God made them garments of skin? Right? They were children of light. They were luminescent creatures. They were gigantic spirits. They had no such containment before that. There's a beautiful midrash, I think the Rabbi Eliezer says, Vayasem kutanot or, with an aleph, vav resh. And God made them garments of light. And someone questions him immediately. He goes, wait a minute. It says here in the Torah, kutanot or with an ayin. And he answers them, or le'acharachet. The garments of skin or leather for after the sin. Garments of light for before the sin. So in a sense what we are spiritual beings, and I'm sure you've heard that before, having a material experience. Yeah? We are not material beings who every once in a while can have a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings who are having a temporary material physical experience. Very important to remember that. Now comes chapter 6. And chapter 6 starts talking about a progression of stuff going wrong. But look how beautifully it begins. And it was that the human being began to, Well, how do we translate that? Let's see. In English it says here, multiply. Yechel ha'adam larov. But larov can mean multiply indeed, but the word riv in Hebrew means fight. And it was that the human being began fighting on earth. Yeah? And this is a very different way of looking at it. It's not about how many people are living on earth. It's what are you doing with the earth that God gave you? That's the point. There is no necessity for starvation in the world. If there is starvation in the world, it's because we are not taking care of the people who need food. It's not God. Everything was given. Everything is there. What are we doing with it? What are we making? Are we hoarding it or are we sharing it? Are we being generous or are we being greedy? Are we listening to each other? Are we respecting each other? Are we in dialogue with each other? Or are we just fighting with each other? Because what the Bible is telling us here is that when that happens, whoa, watch out. Now, Uvanot yuladu lahem, and they gave birth to daughters. It's already dangerous. The moment there are girls or women involved in the Bible, that's dangerous.
Well, without women, how did they give birth?
Well, of course, but don't complicate the issue. What the Bible is trying to tell you is not that women are or are not important. It's not telling you that obviously you cannot have humanity without women. What the Bible is trying to tell you is women have a special power. Okay? Now, we usually look at the Bible as being misogynistic, which it isn't. Rabbinic Judaism is misogynistic. Sometimes. Sometimes it's enlightened. I don't mean enlightened just in those days. Enlightened till today. Yeah? The idea of allowing divorce, the idea of allowing of inheritance rights, the idea of how we listen in court to women, protecting women from violent men. This is rabbinic. Okay? So the same people who said Nashim da'atan kala, women have light brains. And one should not ever walk between a woman and a dog, or between, sayings like that. Well, there are sayings like that in the Talmud. But the same Talmud also goes out of its way to protect women. If you look at a ketubah, right, a marriage, the marriage contract, if you will, that we have in a Jewish wedding, it's one-sided. I'm not talking about today what we do with a ketubah. But the ketubah, as it was originally conceived, was the guarantee that a man gives to a woman that she will be treated okay or else. And there's a penalty, and there's money, and it's signed in front of witnesses to make sure that a woman is protected. So we have to understand when we look at these things, not to be so quick to jump and go, yes, the Middle East in general is a lousy place for women. Okay? But it's also not. Okay? And so when we see the amount of times that the Bible goes and talking about women, and what happens with women, and we'll see here, they're an interesting one. Our instinct as Americans is to go, that's so sexist. Yeah. Oh, first of all, the Bible is not interested in that discussion, period. It really isn't interested in that at all. It's not even dealing with it. But it is telling us something. And the sons of God saw that these women of the humans are really good. Right? And they took wives from themselves from all they have chosen. Original JD. Now, this is telling us something very interesting, because next what's going to happen is only bad. One could conclude from that obviously when men follow women, it's bad. Yeah. Well, why doesn't it say that when the daughters of God saw the men on the earth, and they saw that they were good, that they took men for them? Why doesn't it say that? Because apparently the Bible is not that impressed with men. How's that for a twist on it? Just don't find them that interesting. They don't find them physically that impressive. They do find women that way. Whenever you see misogyny, whenever you see that kind of an attitude towards women, you immediately need to acknowledge the fact that somebody there thinks women are unbelievably powerful. Sure, usually the take on it is going to be negative, but the instinct is first the recognition that apparently women possess a power that the men don't. They're so powerful, as a matter of fact, that they have the power to cause angels or children of God to tumble down from heaven. That's pretty powerful. That is pretty darn powerful. That's unbelievable when you think about it. So I want to put that in your minds when you think about these texts, that yes, the cultural milieu of the Middle East is men are in control. But that doesn't mean that they think women are lesser. They actually many times think women are more, but it's problematic. It's really dangerous. Because you know what happens if you follow, oh my God, everything goes bad. But if you look at story after story, in the story of Yehuda and Tamar, that's going to come later on in the book of Genesis, Tamar is the powerful one, and Tamar is the righteous one, not Yehuda. Judah, who is going to be the head of the biggest tribe of the children of Israel, were named after him, Yehudim, after Judah, Jews, Yehudim. He is less powerful than his daughter-in-law, who he thought, by the way, was a prostitute. So you get immediately in one story, davar v'hipucho. You get one thing and another thing. You get, this woman was sinful, this woman was powerful. This woman was owed something, this woman is actually in control. This woman seems to be doing something deceitful, this woman is righteous. Because Yehuda will say at the end, Tzadekah hi mimeni. She is more righteous than I am. Yehuda says that in front of the entire people surrounding there. So I want you to see those two sides in the Bible. Don't read it as only women are weak or women are lesser or men own women. That is, in one sense, correct culturally, but the Bible isn't seeing them as being weak. The Bible is actually seeing them as strong. It is also placing the blame on them many times because, hey, who else would you blame? I'm going to blame the person who seems to have the most power. You should have known better. You had the power. You should have resisted it. You should have, but you didn't, so it's your fault. And we see that all the time betrayed. That's why when you look at Sephardic Jewish families, please know that the mother is in charge of the family. Nekuda sofit. There's a final nekuda. It's not the father when he talks at a table, people have to listen to him. And then go back to the Beit HaMidrash. Okay? The person running a Sephardic family is the mother, or the nonna, or the grandmother, not the father. Not the father. And that's very Middle Eastern. Men have all the power. Good. Go back to the parliament. Go to wherever it is that you're going. Get out of the house. Okay? I'm in charge. I'm the one who's doing it, and we know that. All right. Now, what does that mean? Yes.
Other than you're raising your eyebrows, are you going to talk about the term sons of God?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I'm going to talk about. Midrash goes out of its way to tell us that, please, it doesn't mean sons of God. Never could it mean sons of God. There's no such thing. Okay? No such thing as sons of God. That's not what it means. It means sons of leaders. Sons of powerful beings. How does it get that? Well, it gives us an example. Exodus chapter 4, I believe. In Exodus chapter 4, when Moses says, well, how am I going to talk to Pharaoh? God says to Moses, right, I'm going to give you Aaron. He's going to be your mouthpiece. Ve'ata tihiye lo Elohim. And you shall be for him God. So they say, well, see, clearly from that we can understand that it means leader. No, we can't. Because maybe exactly God meant in that statement, and you will be for him God. In other words, you're going to speak for me, on behalf of me, to Egypt. It doesn't imply that Elohim in that place means leader. It doesn't. Why is the Talmud so anxious and so, oh my God, all completely tied up in knots about making sure that we don't read this as sons of God? Can anybody tell me what's happening during the Talmudic era, just kind of around our next door building? Christianity, thank you very much, because the Son of God was born. Well, then this couldn't mean that, because we're not them. Now we start seeing theology as argument. Yeah, we're seeing now a contest. We're seeing a wrestling match between two people who are totally connected to each other, right? Because early Christians are Jews. Yeah? As a matter of fact, the main argument between James and Paul in Jerusalem after the death of Jesus is exactly about who can and cannot be accepted into the church or into the congregation. James, Jesus' brother, holds that, well, it's Jews, and they had better be circumcised, and they better keep kosher, and they better be Shomer Shabbat. And it's Paul who takes the argument and goes, no, it's a universal thing. It's not a particular thing. It's not this. So you can understand that this argument is happening around the 1st, 2nd century, and the Talmud has a problem. Now, the Talmud is never going to tell you, don't read it that way because Jesus. It doesn't do that. As a matter of fact, it goes to great lengths not mentioning Jews. If you want a second example of that, you look at the Haggadah of Pesach. Who's mostly missing from the Haggadah of Pesach, which is the story of the exodus of the children of Israel from Egypt. Who took us out of Egypt? Where is he in the Haggadah? Gunish. Why? Well, because this idea of a Messiah, this idea of a Redeemer, of a Deliverer out of slavery, out of darkness into light, is being heavily explored by the rival congregation down the street. And I'm not going to give them that kind of knowledge. So you know what? Let's, to make sure, take that out of the book, because I don't want any mention of that, unless we're going to have other Jews, because Jews are so fragmented, they're all over the place. And by the way, they always were. They always were from day one. That, Chas v'Chalila, I'll have Moses all over the place. By the way, it's referred many times in old times as the suffering Messiah. I know, it sounds, ooh. Yeah, a suffering Messiah. Because, poor guy, he has an enlightenment experience, he sees God, and what's his gift? Walk through the desert for 40 years with the biggest group of complainers. So you can understand why the theory of the suffering Messiah comes in vis-a-vis Moses. Yes?
You said that we go out of our way not to mention Messiah, but we have Eliyahu.
Yes.
At Passover.
Right, and that in and of itself is a fascinating development of how did somebody who was the single most murderous prophet in the Bible, hands down, the bloodiest prophet we have in the Bible is Elijah, who slaughters personally 400 Baal priests on Mount Carmel, so their blood is running down the mountain. How does that guy become this gentle old gentleman for whom you leave a door open to come? I think, what? If I'll keep a distance from Eliyahu, because if I cross him the wrong way, you know how Eliyahu behaves. But it's a wonderful example of a transformation, not only through theology, but through folklore. So that's a whole other discussion about how does folklore, how does Islam, how does Christianity, how do all those things intermingle, how does one thing influence the other so that we end up, and Eliyahu isn't Messiah, Eliyahu is the harbinger of Messiah. It's very important to remember that Elijah is just, and by the way, Kabbalah then comes up with another Mashiach, because there's one Mashiach ben David, Messiah son of David, the Mashiach ben Yosef, and the Messiah son of Joseph. There's two different Mashiachim that we have in Kabbalah. So, so you have to look at all these things, and when I'm going to be quoting from the Zohar now, we have to understand that the Zohar is written in a context. Yeah? I know traditionally it was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai 2nd century, Eretz Israel, in a cave, hiding with the sun for 13 years from the Romans. Okay, let's say it was. The book that we have in our hands, this Zohar, as it was written with its Aramaic, with its peculiarities of grammar and certain wordings, was written in 13th century Spain. And 13th century Spain is Catholic in the north, and it's Muslim. And you can see those influences in the Zohar in a huge way. Okay, it's evident in the language, it's evident in the grammar, but it's also evident in the theology. The theology there suddenly is very interested suddenly in the feminine presence all over the place. Why? Because of Mary.
So what?
Because of Mary. So, okay, now, I understand that's very hard. I mean, obviously, if I'm going to a Mojitzer shul or a Vizhnitzer shul, I'd never say that, because this would be, I'd be considered not just a heretic, but how stupid is what I'm saying. But I'm sorry, there it is. Before that, we're not talking that way about femininity in a divine way, and after our meeting with Christianity, we do. And it's not only Christian, it's not only Muslim, there's also Greek influences, and that's why we're looking at this beginning of chapter 6. So, these sons of God, let's say they're sons of great leaders or judges, had women, and God said, Lo yadum ruchi ba'adam le'olam b'shagam hu basar. And God says, and this is very difficult to translate. Lina, how would you translate this sentence? We're in verse 3. How's it translated there?
And the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for that he also is the flesh.
Yeah, that it doesn't. They are yadun.
Judge.
Exactly. I won't judge the human being forever because they are flesh. We get an opposite reading, correct? Now you should know that's not accidental, because the Zohar talks about an argument between two rabbis. One says, the sentence says, God adores human beings. God adores human beings. God created human beings in God's image and God's likeness, and God loves the human beings. Look, and the thing is, you can't judge them too harshly. Why? Because they're in garments of the material.